Welcome to Kingdom Living with Jessie. This is another video in my Unveiling the System series. In this video, this is considered a second part to the Princes of Jerusalem and the Councils. And in this episode, I'm going to focus on underground Nazi submarine bases, as well as underground meat markets and certain areas of concern for these things. Let me go to a screen share here. You can find this series, Unveiling the System, on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. And all the videos in this series will be under Unveiling the System. You can also find my affidavits and testimony on timothycharleshomeseth.com, and you can find my affidavits there as well. So I'd like to start in the first part of this series, the Princes of Jerusalem and the Councils. I go over some of the sigils. In my coaching courses, Land Assignments 1 through 4, you can find how to decode the city sigils. So as we look at these sigils, they were put in place under the initial governance of the system known as the Babylon system. So in that, the main individuals in control were the Vatican and the Holy See, and it was part of their job to separate the quadrants, both internationally as well as within the United States, and to oversee governance in those quadrants, which microed down to regional levels. And within those regional levels, I get into, in my series of Unveiling the System, how the regions broke down where you have 5 departments that are overseeing the system's assets within those regions. And those 5 departments are going to be your Masons, your Mormons, your Jesuit Catholic, your Kabbalah, and your Satanists. So what happened is that as these regions began to form here within the United States, the Babylon system put into place sigils, which you can find by looking up a state or more at another layer. You can look up the sigils by city and state and look for, put the term after that city and state, put city sigil, and you should see a sigil like this come up if that city is still considered under the Babylon system. So as we look at the state seals or city sigils, those sigils tell us information, which I go over in my land assignment coachings 1 through 4. The main things that every sigil will tell us, and you read them like a clock. The first thing, it can't be seen, but it's known by those who run the quadrants, are the principalities that oversee the area. And every sigil is going to tell you the authority and the jurisdiction, first, of the principalities in the area. Secondly, in this middle layer of the sigils, you will see wording. You may see numbers like we see here. You also may see little symbols like we see here or here. That wording tells us in that region which of the lodges has more authority. In every region, the lodges are distinguished by the Northern and the Southern Lodge. So how they will differentiate that is that you'll see, usually you'll see wording up top and wording down below. And whichever is more emphasized, is a lodge that has more authority. So your Northern Lodge would be up here, your Southern Lodge down here. So we see in the old sigil for the state of Minnesota that the Northern Lodge is the prominent authority, with the Southern Lodge having very little say or vote as to what happens within the state. The third thing that the sigils tell us is that, within this middle layer, you'll see symbols. All of those symbols represent the different brotherhood orders and groups and sovereign military that have authority within that area. So, according to the old sigil, when you see trees, whether the oak tree, the pine tree, that represents your order of the tall trees or the order of the cedars of Lebanon, same thing. When we see mountains or hills in the sigils, that represents your order of Odin, and we see it over here transposed as well in this sigil. Then, whenever you see the half sun or a sunshine with sun rays, that's going to represent a brotherhood order. You have three top orders within the Luciferian Brotherhood, and that's going to be your Order of the Phoenix, your Order of the Golden Dawn, and your Order of Melchizedek. So the sun with the half sun rays, or the sun rays, is going to represent your Order of the Golden Dawn, are prominent in that area. Next, we see the horse with an Indian on it. That's going to go back to one of your older orders, like the Order of the Cedars of Lebanon, which is going to be your Order of the Red Men. Now, it has nothing to do with Native Americans, but that's how it will be symbolized. And wherever you have your Order of the Red Men, you also will have sovereign military known as the Sons of Liberty, who will go hand in hand with them. Next, we see the farmer and the plow and the basic farm tools. Wherever we see that, it represents that you're going to have recruitment in that area for your first through third degrees in masonry. So, the state of Minnesota has been an area where they do a lot of recruiting. Now, we see that the sigil changed, where they changed it to the loon. And in the first of this series, I go more into the imagery of the wings, how that connects to the eagles, how the way the bird faces, goes back to the countries or their allegiances. You have the two-faced eagle, which is gonna, if it points to the, we'll say to the east there, that's going to represent allegiance to Rome. If its face is pointing towards the west, that's going to represent allegiance to Germany. When you see wings like this, it can represent that 33rd degree as well in masonry, as well as so much more. And then I get into the star image, the northern star, what that represents. The water represents that you're going to have a connection with Leviathan. But there's more in this sigil. In this one, we see, instead of just wording, we see numbering as well. Now, whenever we see numbering or words that are in this inner layer, that represents that there, are underground installations. The dots, punctuation, stars, diamonds, whatever we see in this middle layer tells us that there are underground military installations. When you see the numbers like this, or the wording in the middle section here, in the way intersection, that tells you that in those areas of the region, they're connected to underground submarine lines and massive submarine bases. So initially we see, one here, and you see two other installations in the south there. You see that there's an installation up in the northern of the state, and then there's also one here, which we're going to get into that in a minute. Here we see that they've combined in the latest seal all of this, and they've changed the shape to a diamond, and there's a reason for that. because it has to do with who has authority of those submarine lines now. Um, so we're going to get to that in a minute, as to who has authority over those submarine lines. Um, in this, we have another example, like as we shift into Minnesota and their seal, we see some things that, are going to be important to understand. First, when we see, the gold done in pearls like that, that's significant in the system. At one layer, it's going to represent your order of Melchizedek. At another layer, it's going to represent the golden chain, which we'll get into in a minute here. But I want you to notice too how in this symbol we see all the little stars and that circle forming another big star. And then they have the word Minnesota there. All of that communicating information to them, that the state was placed under a star seal, which we see in the new flag. They've defined that star seal to an 8-pointed star, a white 8-pointed star, and we see the dark blue and the aqua blue colors. Now, all of that is significant because, flags within are used by the Brotherhood to make declarations over the land. They are considered a ribbon contract, meaning that they don't just represent physical things. The colors, the shapes you find on them represent contracts within the system, between the physical land and between spiritual entities. Um, those entities going back to principalities such as Avedon, Baal, Molech, Baphomet, Leviathan, Azazel, Toth, Samael, and Ashtaroth. Um, so, their symbols are very important to them, and their declarations are contracts with those principalities and powers. And they'll use their flags as declarations, as ribbon contracts with those entities. Um, and so, as we look further here, we're going to see some things about the state of Minnesota. Where does this white star go back to? What does the 8-pointed star represent? And what orders do we see the dark blue, the aqua, connected to? So, as we're getting into this further, part of the base understanding is that, and I get into this in the first episode um, much further, but, within entry level, you have the first 3 degrees of masonry. After the 3rd degree, which is a master mason, they may not call themselves masons anymore. They'll call themselves initiates of the flame or illuminated ones. But all of these degrees, that are put here are considered degrees of illumination. Now, in the first video, I go through how on the Brotherhood side, your base degrees of illumination after the Master Mason are going to be your 15 degrees, which we find here, the Knight of the East of the Sword, which is a council degree. Then we find our 30 degree is next, which is up here, your Knight of Kadash, or the Holy Knights. Then after that, you have 60, 90, 180, and 360 degrees. So, as you can see from this, up to this 33rd degree, in Inspector General, those are just your base levels of degrees of illumination. These are individuals who are just getting into their circle groups and their understanding of one illumination, which is going to be connected to magic connected to spiritual gates, connected to contracts with spiritual entities that they're going to worship. Um, you know, their base understanding of temples and worship that happens at temples to those entities, which is going to include, the temple prostitution, sexual orgies, sex magic, as well as sacrifices. Um, so, this is where they're really going to kick into that is after that 30 degrees, they're going to get into the darker stuff. Now, within this, each of your um, degrees, that's your brotherhood side. When you see, you know, several other numbers um, after, the base degrees, like if you see a 3, that tells you that they're also in the sovereign military, that they're a knight. If you see a 5 after the degrees, that tells you that they're a preceptor, meaning that they're a regional leader within the sovereign military. So they're going to have oversight over other knights. Um, then you have a 7, which is going to be a quadrant leader within the sovereign military, and they'll have jurisdiction and authority over preceptors and knights within the different regions in their quadrant. Um, Now, in this, they're always going to be advancing, and they really advance. They want you to believe that they are a Christian religion. So a lot of the symbols are going to come in a form of godliness. The symbols that you're going to recognize them by are their crosses, as well as other symbols that they're going to use, including the name of God in the Hebrew form Yahweh. All of that is meant to be that form of godliness that makes you believe that they are a Christian, that they're Christian religion and organization. And this is where they go off of their base rights that, they have the right and the freedom to express their religion. But really, what is behind this? In my educational affidavit, I talk about the discrimination that at the end of the day, those who are in the brotherhood system at the higher levels, um, past your 30 degree, um, and the sovereign military order, they're going to engage in rape, they're going to engage in torture, they're going to engage in satanic ritual and murder, they're going to engage in adrenochrome and organ harvesting, they are going to engage in worse things such as cannibalism. And really, they have infiltrated every part of our government, as well as our military, as well as our educational systems and our churches. And, they've gotten their foot in there in that form of godliness. And through that, are infiltrating and acting as, the government and the military behind the scenes. So, it really is a matter of national security because this is a foreign government and a foreign military. And as we look further, we're going to see how they set things up to deceive us in order to gain control. That control gives them access primarily to our children as well as other children, not only in our country, but in other countries. And with these children, they're raising up individuals within their government and all of this is to prosper the system, to keep the system going and to keep the sovereign military order going. Um, so as we look further at this, I want to get into, kind of the successions. In this, we see that our 15 degree, our 16 degree, and, our 15 through basically our 19 degrees are going to be connected to council entry level degrees. So, what is the council? The council within the system, um, is the main council of 300 is also known as the Satanic or the Druidic Council. It also is known as the Global Federation or the Global Alliance. Within that, you have 300 seats. Those 300 seats are rotational seats, meaning that you can have multiple people sitting within one seat. Each seat is assigned to quadrants, and the oversight of quadrants either internationally or within the United States. And within that, that governance, the councilmen will receive orders directly from the Mothers of Darkness, who receive their orders directly from Lucifer, and they will instruct the council, in what's supposed to happen within their quadrants. Then the councilmen on the Brotherhood side oversee their quadrant leaders, who are going to be your grand high priests and priestesses. Your grand high priests and priestesses are also working in connection with the protector departments for this sovereign military, and the quadrant leaders for the sovereign military, which are going to be your supreme preceptors. So all of those individuals are going to have oversight within those quadrants. So your entry level, what do we mean by entry level councils? Well, the system is constantly wanting to keep itself going. So as people enter into positions, they're always going to be looking for others that eventually will be replacing them. So your 15 through your 19 degrees are considered, kind of base council training levels. And those individuals, if they continue, they may very much end up in some of those top council positions. Um, but they'll be utilized by the council in running the governance within the quadrants, um, both internationally as well as in the United States. So, your 15th degree, you have three main council entry levels. Your 15th degree, which is the Knight of the East of the Sword or the Eagle. Your 16th degree, which are the Princes of Jerusalem, and your 17th, which are the Knights of the East and the West. And then your 18th, which is your Knight of the Rosy Cross. Now, another name for your Knights of the Rosy Cross are your Rosicrucians, and they're going to be recognized by a symbol of a red rose, usually that red on a black color or red on gold. Your Knights of the East and West are going to be connected to the Knights of Kadash, and their main colors are going to be black, gold, and red, as well as your Knights of the East and West. Your Princes of Jerusalem are going to be connected to more of a green color. And then your Knights of the Sword can also be black or gold, as well as you may have some connection to the green colors because of the council. So looking at the 16th degree, and why this is important is because as we begin to look at the things happening in Minnesota, we're going to see that there is a connection to these princes of Jerusalem and the intelligence communities, which are the U.S. Intelligence community is set up, where when you look at the sigil, which I go over in the first episode, you see within that sigil, you see around it the 16 stars. In the sigils, like when you see multiple stars going around, that represents the councils. So which council's connected to the 16 stars? That's going to be your lower councils, which is connected to your princes of Jerusalem. So, when you start to look into the these knights, these orders, their symbols, the best way to do it is to look up the degree or the order and to put in badges and emblems, and you'll see, their signs come up. Like for this one, your 13 degree, this is what I was talking about when you see the stars like this in that middle layer, multiple stars, not just like, two at the bottom, because that would be installations, but in their badges, when you see, you know, stars going around or in the sigils, that represents that connection to the councils. So, we see, within um, these degrees into the sovereign military, how it works is that you're going to have a couple entry level successions. So, one of your main entry level successions into the knight groups is going to be your Knights of Malta. Then, as they would continue in their studies, they would continue to enter into other circle groups where they would advance in their degrees of illumination. So, your base entry groups are going to be like your Knights of Malta. Then you have, like, here, you've got your Royal Arc degree, and then you have your Polar Star. And that's just a few of the entry level ones. So in this one, we're looking at the Royal Arc degree. And one of their main symbols is going to be a triangle. And you see it here in this one. They have a triangle and then what looks like an H with a T on top. They also could have, the triangle with the upside down triangle in it. Here you see kind of where it comes from, that triangle comes from the right side up triangle contract. All of their symbols and the lines are actual contracts with entities. The right side up is known as a holy contract, while the upside down triangle is known as an unholy contract. Together, they form a seal, a magical seal, which is known as the Seal of Israel, which we see on their flag. Notice, though, how when we see some of the other signs, we see the Royal Arc, that H and the T here. Well, what does that represent? That H actually goes back to the H, like that you see within the next level of the polar star succession, the preceptor level. It goes to, the IHS, which is going to connect to your order under Jesus Christ, which is the Jesuits. And, we'll look at that in a minute here. But it represents that H in the name of, Jesus Christ, supposedly. But what they put on top of it is a T, and I go into, in my Epstein decode, I break down this T, and where that comes from, that goes back to one of your other light layers up above. You see that T cross there with what looks like the crowny thorns, which connects to your degree, your 25th degree, the Knight of the Brazen Serpent. And when you see this T in this crossbar here, it has the name Nehushtan, which who is Nehushtan? Nehushtan was the serpent that was raised up by Moses on a pole. And, the Lord had sent a plague of poisonous snakes to destroy Israel because of their sin. And when, they cried out, the Lord said to Moses, raise up a serpent on the pole, and whoever looks at it shall live. And then later we see Israel, gave the name Nehushtan to the serpent and began to raise up the poles with the serpents on them, worshiping Nehushtan, the snake entity. And, it all goes back to that. And we see the same thing in the Mormon temple. They will emphasize stories of Elijah. You'll see all these emblems and pictures of Elijah holding his arm up like this and doing this symbol. That symbol representing that, when they take the contract with the serpent entities, they literally will wrap a snake around their arm. They will hold the head like this as a sign of power. And this becomes the sign of Nehushtan. So when they go to enter into their Gnostic meetings, they literally will, that'll be the sign that they have to use to enter in, the sign of Nehushtan. Where does that T go back further in my Epstein decode? I talk about how that T, is the top, how the structure of Herod's temple was. And so for them, it represents, Herod's temple, where they would sacrifice and they would, raise it up and worship the Lord in that. But really, they were worshiping other gods as well, Nehushtan being one of them. So those are, that's what these symbols, this H and this T, really represent. Um, then in their symbols, we see the Eye of Horus up here. We see, one of the other things that you'll be able to recognize in their attire is that they'll have cords, they'll have certain knots that they'll do. This threefold clover knot is the one that, often they'll do for your royal arc degree on their robes that they're wearing. So, for the Royal Arc degree, again, the symbology is going to be their entry level. And then here, we see this is your Masonic compass, your base Mason. Then they're going to get into the Royal Arc degrees. You can have this one as well, which is a continuance. You get Opus Dei. And then you have the crown with the sideways cross through it, which is going to be one of the symbols for your Rosicrucians. Um, so, back to that Minnesota flag, as we begin to look at the star, where does the white star come from? We see that, you're going to see the white cross is connected to your Knight of Malta entry order. So, your polar star is going to start out like wherever you see the white cross, that, the vertical and the horizontal lines are equal in height and width. That's going to be connected to your Knights of Malta. Then you see the white five-pointed star with the dark blue in the background. We see in their ribbon, you have that aqua color. This is the badge for your Order of the Polar Star. Now, as they continue up in that degree, your next level, here's where we see that I, the H, and the S, that H with the cross and a full cross instead of just a T, representing your Order of the Seraphim, which is a preceptor, the preceptors in the sovereign military for the Order of the Polar Star. You may also see the seraph um, in their symbology, as well as the cross with the two cross lines representing the preceptor order. With that, we also see the three crowns, telling us that beyond Jesuits, they can be connected to your Order of the Bath or your Order of the Garter, which is another knight group that's going to operate at regional levels. Then their third layer is what we see here, which we see a five-pointed red star. And this, you see the laurels actually descending down into a mantle. And then we see, the ribbon, which has multicolors. You've got red, you've got a weird orange, you've got yellow, you've got a green that comes out in this coloring, as well as, that mustard yellow. All of that being connected to your Order of the Mongolia, which is the third succession in the polar stars. So after their preceptor leaders, Order of Seraphim, they would enter into the quadrant levels layers, which is going to be your Order of Mongolia, and they'll have the red star. Now, that red star in this symbology of the laurels going down is going to connect on the female side and some of the upper men, it will lead into your Order of the Sphinx. And then it also will connect to the fourth succession in this series, which is going to be your Order of the Red Banner. Now, I do an episode that you can find on timothycharleshomeseth.com about the judicial system, their connect, and the bar and their connection to this Order of the Red Banner, which we see at the base of that. You've got your symbols for Russia. You also have the red star, your symbol for China. We see within this too, the golden cord, which is going to connect back to some things. But, in this further, the 8-pointed star also connects under your Knights of Malta to your Dominican orders. And we'll see it here, but notice too, for your Dominican orders, you also get that almost that full laurel, but like we do with the Order of the Mongolia, but only turned upside down. We also see this same, full laurel like that, ascending up in connection to your Order of the Red Banner, which is always going to, it goes to your councils, the lower end councils, and the lower end council seats, which will always be connected to judges and the law. So that's why we're seeing some of the symbology the same in between some of these orders. And as we get further into this, that same 8-pointed star, which the 8-pointed star can be seen in several different presentations within the system. It, like we see it with the U.S. intelligence community, like a nautical star, that's one of the ways it can be presented. You may also see it more like your Solomonic or your Star of Israel, but instead of 6 with 8 points. So you may see it like that. But also you may see it more looking like an 8-pointed quilting square. And, what does it represent when you see the 8-pointed star or even the 4 points? It's going to connect to their ritual seasons. So, your north, south, east, west are going to be the main rituals that everybody within the system is required to attend. And then you get extra seasons, the off seasons, which form an X. So, within the system, at times they'll declare, their orders, and it will be in connection to the rituals, in that area. Are they just, like if you see a church and it's got that, like a flower or a clover with the, everything prominent pointing to the north, the south, the east, and the west, that means that, during certain rotations, they're going to be used underground. Their altars will be used for main ritual times. Versus if you see, the clovers or the stars, the flowers with just the 4 points at the off corners, that means they're going to be part of the ritual rotations where they could host the rituals that are not the main seasonal ones. So when we're looking at this, we have to connect that, what are the jobs of your princes of Jerusalem? If that's what these stars are representing, that you've got departments within our intelligence community that are overseen by the princes of Jerusalem, are they within their areas where they have their headquarters in their departments? Are they also connected to different rituals? We see here, even we see the 5-pointed flower when the 2 petals are up top like this and it forms the pentagram, the pentagon. This is also seen as an upside down star, or the goat head. Um, so that's going to be connected to, ritual times and seasons, and what they're all engaging in. Um, here we see that same pentagon shape made with the stars in your Princes of Jerusalem, um, sigil. And in the first episode, I talk about, the scales of justice, the hand, the D, the Z, all of that. And we see that triangle, um, or I'm sorry, the diamond shape, and that's representing their symbol of the parallelogram. And, where what's important then to realize is that as we're looking at this seal of Minnesota, the shapes have changed. You go from, even though you have an implied diamond with the shapes here, it definitely is a diamond here. And then you also have, a diamond shape here with the 4 points, the four-pointed star, um, telling us that, you know, out of this area where this underground base is, that it will be an area where they will have rituals 4 times a year, and you will have the Order of Odin in connection performing those rituals. Um, and it tells you the authority, that your princes of Jerusalem in that area are going to now be the main ones in control of that underground base. And whatever, we see here, these were originally diamonds too, telling us that they're going to have authority over those installations and those Nazi submarine lines. Um, so, as we get further, um, a great resource for their signs and symbols that they're going to use as they continue in their degrees is a book called The Initiates of the Flame. As you can see from their symbols, here we see, that right side up triangle and upside down triangle forming the Star of Israel. Why do we see that imagery in this book? It's because it also is a symbol to them of Solomonic magic. We also see within, the pages, we see the swastika. Well, why is that? It's because at the end of the day, those who are part of the Order of Melchizedek are also Nazis. And we see this five-pointed star with the two brotherhood handshake. And to them, what does that five-pointed star represent? It's known to all Masons as that of the soul. It's the Star of Bethlehem, which heralds the coming of the Christ within. Um, it represents the body united in the marriage of the Lamb and the union of the higher and the lower, that where the Christ is born. What does all that mean? They put it into Christian language, but what is it really representing to them? It's not, representing their relationship with our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. At the end of the day, they're Nazis. They believe that they are gods. They believe that they're ascending into their godhood. And how are they going to do it? What does the brotherhood really represent? How are they going to achieve the marriage of the Lamb? It's going to occur through homosexual sex. Their sex magic. So, for them, that's what that five-pointed star represents, is sex magic, the homosexual sex. So one other thing I want to pull out as we're looking at this, um, this is from the book again. The alchemist realizes that he himself is the philosopher's stone. Did you catch that? The alchemist realizes that he himself, his body, is the philosopher's stone. What does the philosopher's stone represent? Eternal life, right? The godhood. that this stone is made diamond. Literally, I talk about this, how they do that, um, this is part of two things. First, the expendable children, after they ritually sacrifice, after they cannibalize, they are going to pressurize and incinerate that the remains into a diamond. And that diamond they're going to use in sex magic. But there's also further for themselves, the ultimate form of blood magic is knowing how to turn your um, blood cells into diamonds and therefore change the state of your matter and being from the physical into the spiritual. So, that's what it's talking about. The stone is made diamond, like when salt and sulfur, or the spirit and the body, are united through mercury, the link of mind. Man is the incarnated principle of mind, as the animal is of emotion. He stands with one foot on the heavens and the other on the earth. His higher being is lifted to the celestial spheres. What is it talking about? It's talking about being in the spirit realm, in other dimensions, but the lower man ties him to matter, so being both of physical and spiritual form. Now the philosopher building his sacred stone is doing so by harmonizing his spirit and his body. The result is the philosopher's stone. The hard knocks of life chip it away and facet it until it reflects light from a million different angles. All of that getting into sex magic and blood magic. Let's keep going here. So, all of these symbols, when they're, using these, like, look at how many stars there are. Notice that the stars, even you start with the main point here. As you get further, they shift and you get the stars that are pointed down in the goat's head. Um, all of that representing places, departments, people who are going to be overseeing um, their ascension. They're using the positions that they have within our government and our military to, advance their their foreign government and military and their positions within those. Um, so I want to get back to here. We see in some of their symbol, we see the ascension of stars, the different ways that that's displayed in some of their symbols. And we see that here as well. In this initial flag, we see that ascending, descending of stars, forming a bigger star image. Um, so you'll see a lot of their symbology like that. Um, this is a great resource, the Web of Harem.org. You can look at the different degrees and you'll see their sashes, their emblems, the main symbols that they use. We also see the sword, the dagger there is a big one for them. Further, as we look at this order, we see some of the older Kabbalah symbols connected, and here you see that right side up triangle and the right side down triangle representing that sacred seal to them. You see the two-headed eagles, these representing your base column supports within the brotherhood. Um, so everything's read in layers, but it's common imagery in Solomonic magic to see two colonnades on the sides, or even, if they have a third thing in the middle like they do here. This is going to represent your base colonnade, which will be your main Solomonic contract, and then your supports. Like this would be your tree of life. This is going to be, one will be your ball pole, the other your Ashtaroth. You'll have the sun and the moon, or sorry, the sun and the moon over them. Um, one representing Germany, one representing Rome, yet you're always going to have an equal duality. Here we see as well the white star and the red star upside down, and we see your base Rosicrucian cross, which will have the three bubbles on it, and usually there's a rose here in the middle. And then you see here, this is a pentacle of Solomon, a six-pointed pentacle. So all these symbols can be, symbols that they're going to use in connection to the Kabbalah. We talked earlier about that gold chain and that imagery. That's going to go back to, again, Kabbalah, different symbols that are going to mean things. At the gold chain can also be seen as two golden dragons. One, both eating each other's tails. It could be seen as a serpent eating its tail. It's implied in the middle, you're going to have that Solomonic seal, and the different symbols in it. But that's the seal for the golden chain. At the core of that, you're going to have the upper part representing your Babylon system, the lower part representing your Leviathan system rising up from, what's seen at the bottom imagery of their Kabbalah tree. You have the Leviathan representing the water down below, the water contracts. And we know in Revelations that beast is seen as coming up out of the water. So, rising to power. So that's where you see, the Leviathan always with the head to the east coming up, representing that rise into power. So as we get further into this, it takes us to some areas where we're seeing things. And we're going to get further into some stuff here. So as we're looking at Minnesota and we've looked at the sigil, the areas that are kind of importance, is this upper area here, which I think it's running along the water systems. I think that, there's underground Nazi installations and submarine lines that run through, these waterways up here, going all the way to this Lake of the Woods. Then you have, your Cloquet area over here, and there's been a lot going on in there, but this is where in the sigil we see, as we look at, let's just take a second here to look back. As we look at this Minnesota, we see that in that area, we see that huge four-pointed star, and that, is roughly connected to this Cloquet area here and extending out into this Lake Superior, which is a lot of access, not just to Minnesota and Canada, but also Michigan, Wisconsin areas, extending down then into your Chicago areas, which, there's a massive underground Nazi submarine, military base under there as well. And then, this lower area here is where we see the wording and stuff. I believe it connects to your Austin, Minnesota areas, which we'll get into. These individuals, it's important to understand their governance. Their first code that they are bound by, those who are in the Luciferian Brotherhood and the Sovereign Military Order, is the Code of Silence, which means, you don't tell anyone, you cannot talk to anyone about the Kabbalah, the hidden knowledge. Anything that you learn within your circle group stays within your circle groups. You can be in as many circle groups as you want, but each one the knowledge that's there, the things that occur there, stay within that circle group. That includes, your sex magic as well as your sacrifices, your worship of entities, what entities, your signs, your symbols, your tokens for entering in. All of that is bound by that silence. And breaking that silence, when you break it, because everything is experienced as groups, you don't just commit crimes by yourself. Your whole circle group commits the crime and is witnesses. And that way, it makes it more difficult to tell anything that's happening, because you're not just going against one or two people. It's your entire group that is involved. um, so that's how they work and operate within each regional area. And then, the next codes that they're bound by is the Code of Brotherhood, which states, one, it's your duty to love your brother, which means that if your brother has a need, whatever that need is, it's your job to meet that need. Um, Secondly, if your brother is found in sin, it's your duty to cover your brother's sin to all extent of the means, meaning that you do whatever it takes to cover that sin and to make it look like it doesn't happen. And that's really where we get a lot of this foreign government and foreign military operating within our country, is because, they put themselves into positions in the government as well as in the military where they can then cover, they can both, um, love their brother as well as cover their brother's sins. And beyond the codes of silence, the code of brotherhood, at the lower councils, they're going to be bound by two constitutions. The first is going to be their constitutions and statutes of the Grand and Supreme Councils under the Grand Inspector General, the patrons, the chiefs, and the commissioners. You're going to see within this, they set up the Inspector General position. Um, and those individuals are going to be your 15 through your 33rd degree of the ancient and accepted Scottish rite, and bound by these regulations, um, in the name of their very holy and great architect of the universe, um, you know, which is not the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Yahweh. No, they're going to have another name that's going to represent. And you can look up Thelemic Magic, Aleister Crowley. Um, you'll see that in his magic, in Thelemic magic, which is connected to under the Golden Dawn, they're going to do things with triangles and with letters. In the Golden Dawn, the letters that they'll use will be the Hebrew letters for the name of God, Yahweh, and they'll start off with like a yod, then it will have a yod hey, and then next a yod hey vav, and then a yod hey vav hey, and represents different layers of magic that they're doing. The same thing with Crowley magic. You have his spell Abracadabra, which starts off with the A, and then you get the AB, and it will build until you get the fullness of that deity that they're calling upon. So, this isn't just Latin, it's very purposeful in the placement and, what they're representing. Um, within this, we see the connection to the councils under or in the connection with the Rosicrucians, their constitutions, their statutes that they're going to be bound by. Um, within their orders, all the articles of the Constitution, statutes, and regulations laid down in the year 1762 by the 9 commissioners of the Grand Council of Prince Masons of the Royal Secret, which are not contrary to the present regulations, are retained and will be observed. Those which are contrary will be abrogated and considered to be expressly abolished. They get into the Sovereign Grand Inspector General and how he's to keep order, what are the regulations for that. There is a lot of information in this Constitution about the Supreme Council, how they're regulated in the regions and in the quadrants, that is important to read and to understand, because this is how they're operating behind the scenes. And, when you get into the articles, there's a lot of terms that are going to be used, and those terms dictate for them their scope of authority and their jurisdictions within their quadrants and their regions, and how they're going to work and operate. So in that, you're going to see how they're working in connection to the lodges, um, and how they are to give an account to one another, um, in their positions and within the things that they are doing. In this, they are receiving money, and, it gets into how they're to, regulate, and the accountability that they're to have. So one of the things with the inspectors, they will be held responsible for entering all their actions as they occur or risk repudiation or even suspension. So I want to bring that out, because who are the inspector generals? In the first episode of this, I get into how, that's the accounting within the governmental agencies and departments that we have. Your inspector generals are the ones that are to hold to account to, make sure that finances, money are being spent as they should be, make sure that there's not waste or fraud. So waste and fraud prevention. Yet, if their allegiance really is to the Brotherhood and the sovereign military order, well, now we know why we the people are not getting the accounting that we should, because they're operating under different constitutions and using their positions for other means. Their second constitution is the Supreme Council of the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction. This document goes through the same things as the other one, and talks about their regulations, and the Grand Constitution is the other one. So this is the second that they're bound by. So the inspector generals will be operating behind the scenes under these constitutions. Now, to give you, some more example, this is your, this is the ritual and the oaths that your Knights of the East and West are going to take, which we see was part of that, you know, 18th degree, I think. And in here at the very bottom, you get the Zerubbabel also being connected to your 16th degree, your Order of Princes of Jerusalem. But here in this line, it says, a knight of the east and the west, you are presented with a trowel, a symbol of labor, to remind you, that trowel being uh, the scales of justice, to remind you that it should be your constant care to labor with us in our efforts to achieve that ideal of masonry, the brotherhood of man. So there we see within their own oaths and rituals that connection to the brotherhood. Another example of their oath that they're going to take for the councils says that I will hold allegiance to the said Supreme Council and be loyal thereto as the supreme authority of the right. What right? will hold illegal and spurious every other body that may be established within its jurisdiction, claiming to be a supreme council to which said supreme council has not extended due recognition as such, and every other body of said right within the same jurisdiction that does not hold its power from said supreme council or from a supreme council recognized by it, and will hold no communication whatever in Scottish Rite Masonry with any member of the same, or allow him to visit any body of the Rite of which I may be a member, and I will dispense justice to my brethren according to the laws of equity and honor. And should I violate this, my solemn vow and pledge, I consent to be expelled from the Scottish Rite Masonry and all rites therein, and in any body of the Rite, and to be announced to every body of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite in the world as a traitor and forsworn, and may God aid me to keep and perform the same. Amen. Um, so this is a part of their allegiance to the supreme councils. As you can see, it's an oath to a foreign government, by which they consider themselves traitors if they violate their constitutions under it. And, in my land assignment coachings, I really get into these seals and sigils, the signs, the hidden meanings behind them, all connected to the deities they worship, the lodges that they're connected to, as well as the departments in the system, the Masons, the Mormons, the Jesuit Catholic, the Kabbalah, the Satanists, and the Brotherhood orders, and sovereign military orders that they connect themselves to, and what the symbols mean, what are the contracts that they've taken. Now, this gets further because, really what we have happening is that within, these departments, they're receiving funds, and those funds are going into projects and fundraisers, such as, there in Minnesota, you have the Great Lakes Protection Fund. They're going to use these funds, I feel, behind the scenes to prosper their brotherhood agendas, as well as to upkeep the underground bases, the underground submarine lines that they're using. And they're funneling mass amounts of money through these projects. When you look into their websites, another one you have is the watershedcouncil.org. When we look into their websites, we see symbols that are also seen, which I point out in the first one with these departments, and connected to their different brotherhood groups. You get all these 501c3s that they connect, and again, they set up all these sub 501c3s by which they're going to funnel the money. And in all that, we, the people, are losing the accountability, the transparency, because, who are they beholden to? They're beholden to their own brotherhood groups. They're going to benefit, they're going to love their brothers by funneling money into these groups, claiming that they're doing certain things, but there's a continual outsourcing. We talked about this, like one of your ones connected um under Earthshare, which this gets to, you got Earthshare in connection to your watershed councils. Earthshare is a brand new 501c3. They've got all of these that they're connecting to, including your national network of fiscal sponsors. When you look into them, they've got 3 main members. And, this is supposed to be all for Minnesota and northern, connected to the Great Lakes, um, which is surrounding certain states. But all of a sudden, those states, the people in those states no longer have say about what's happening to their water. Instead, you get groups like this, where all of a sudden now you've got the C3 Capital Fund out of California you've got the Art Business Collective out of Long Island, New York, and then you've got a law firm out of Seattle, Washington, who now are having more say, more dictation as to what happens with the funds that are given that are supposed to be for those superior lakes and for the things that would prosper the lakes and keep them for the people who are there. Um, so with this outsourcing, then, we get further, as we look at the city of Austin, um, this is connected to their symbol of their old sigil. We see that Austin, like what you'll see as, the old sigils were circular, like our, departments of the intelligence sigils. Those were under the Babylon system and, would be very precise in the information about who has authority and jurisdiction in the area. But as the new system takes over, the Leviathan system, we're going to see all the city signs begin to be very plain, just a green background, and you'll usually just see the city name on it. We see some remnants of the old sigil here. You just see a single oak tree representing both your order of the tall trees or the cedars of Lebanon, as well as an area that's high in Druidism. The oak tree is commonly known, as well as Kabbalah magic is seen by the symbology of the tree. Um, Within this Austin area, there's several churches. A main thing, in my land assignments 4, I get into how to read the face fronts of the older Catholic, Jesuit Catholic churches, that they would communicate a lot of information about, if there was a spiritual gate there, if the church is used as a temple, meaning that there's going to be an altar underground. There's going to be what they consider, the sex magic, the temple prostitution taking place in that building, as well as sacrifices. And so, common structure, we see, your single line here, and then these are going to represent your ball and your Ashtaroth poles. Um, the same thing here, we see that single line contract, the wider face front here and here representing your ball and your Ashtaroth poles. Um, telling us both that these churches will be used for Solomonic magic. They are gates, and we see a triangle kind of topper on both of them, telling us that both of these are also going to be temples, meaning there will be an altar underneath. Um, but when you look further into the Austin area, there's some other things that are, common with the Brotherhood. Um, you know, these churches and this area is very reminiscent of one of the Brotherhood's areas in Ashton, Wisconsin, which has a ritual wall underground. But it's also a place where in their churches, they, part of the training that the Brotherhood children go through in that area is going to include learning magic in making nitrate, nitrate being one of the biggest things used in the procuring of meat. Now, I've talked about in my testimony how in my affidavits, how, beyond the cannibalism, you get the human meat markets with the system, both underground as well as above ground. Um, where they're making meat. So it's interesting that in your Austin area, you have the Hormel Foods plant there in Austin. You also have a secondary one, the Moselle meats, and they're going to be connected to seafood as well as other types of meat. Um, I think that this is important to look into in that area because you have some other things. Um, you know, Meat is the cannibalism, one of the older ways it was signified in the Masonic symbols was that you would see barrels representing a mason's wages. You may see grain or wheat stacks. Um, you also may see corn. All of those things not really representing food items. You have, your corn really representing child pornography, or pedophilia. It also, can represent bestiality. You have your, salt pork really representing the cannibalism going on in the human meat markets. And you have, the wheat representing other things as well. Um, that they're going to gather in places to access these things. The wheat, representing both your granaries, your flour mills. You also could have your water mills represented by the kind of Dutch mill fan seen in the imagery at times. So representing how are they, where is the access, where is the production, the distribution. You have both production, transportation, distribution. Um, and in my decode on the Cloquet area, we had a coded journal had surfaced that gave a lot of keys to the satanic underground operating in the out of the Cloquet, Minnesota area. You can find my decode on Cloquet, Minnesota on timothycharleshomeseth.com. But in that, I talk about the paper mills there, the other mills, the flour mills, and the connection to the trains, the railroad there. And then you also have nuclear facilities not being far from those areas and access to, mass amounts of water that they're controlling in that very small town area. But as we look at the curing of meat, within the Brotherhood system, they teach the old procurement methods, which, they can do things still like in the more advanced way, but you'll get specialists that they teach the old procuring way. So, they'll identify the churches or the areas, usually with the alchemy sign, the aquaphorus symbol, which looks like a kind of like a cage or a gate to a city, old ancient city gate, like they would use in medieval times, but that's the aquaphorus. And that symbol also in alchemy was used in connection to making nitrate or nitric acid, which nitrate is, key, um, connected to salt in the procuring of meat. And so within that, the natural process for making nitrate is actually based off of atmospheric reactions, which occurs with lightning strikes. Um, and what will happen is that you get these underground caverns and caves where, I call it kind of the drippy faucet cave. You get all these stalagmites, you'll get water dripping in the area, you'll get collection pools. And in there they will teach, children that are learning fire magic. One of the things they teach is lightning, and they'll, electrify the atmosphere that way in teaching the magic. And in that, you get the water then dripping, and you'll get pools of bacteria that will, like the water that pools will have bacteria that kind of is connected to that. And between the lightning and the pooled bacteria, you end up with nitrates, and they'll collect, the nitric acid with that and the nitrates and separate everything and use that in that meat procuring that they get. So, one of the byproducts of that, when they begin to separate the salt and the water from the nitric acid or the nitrates, is you'll get sulfur. And you'll get this very, the water that's left with the bacteria in it will be very sulfury smelling. And they tend to, you know, several places that you go, um, you know, the Brotherhood is notorious for making tourist places out of these places. And why? Because they want to, make it look like nothing's really happening. They want to kind of gain control of access and gain control over who's getting access to the area and when they're having access of it. So they'll set up areas as tourist areas. And, that's part of the way they'll get a lot of energy flowing through the place as well as quantum energies like fingerprints, footprints, um, stuff like that. And anyway, they'll set up these little springs that have real sulfury smelling water. And usually you'll see they'll have some story about someone coming into that area and there'll be a little canister of salt. All of that, for them, they'll understand that what's really behind it, that it's an area, that's going to be energized atmosphere and, you know, that they're getting the nitric acid, nitrates out of that area. As we look at the Austin, Minnesota area and its surrounding areas, it's known as a driftless area. It's characterized by its unique crust topography and its landscape. Its features of bedrock and underground cave systems. So you have, the Mystery Cave, as well as we'll look at here in a minute, several other cave systems that all interlock in that area. And they do have them set up as tourist areas. Um, so that's interesting, knowing all that I've just shared with you, that this is how the Brotherhood operates. Are they using these systems, gathering nitrates, um, as training grounds for those in the area who are getting into the human meat markets? Um, you know, and you have all of this within a centralized area, that massive cave network extending, into your areas of Iowa over here. Um, you've got your mystery caves, your Forestville cave, and your Goliath uh, caves, and all of that, being, I think, easily accessed by these meat companies and their locations. So, do they have direct access to these cave areas and are they utilizing them? Um, the other interesting thing is that, all of that being connected to Mason wages. Um, in that Austin area, you've got a big labor and career force, and that labor and career force in connection to, um, your meat markets and people who are employed and working for them. So, just stuff that I'm seeing that, understanding how the system works and operates, I think it should be a matter of concern and investigated, because I believe there's much more going on than just your simple meat production. Here we see, the salt pork connection to the Masons' wages. Again, they're going to want you to believe that is just, representative of things, but it says, the salt pork itself, distinct from the symbolic salt in Masonic tradition, has a history as a significant food item, especially for preservation purposes before the advent of refrigeration. These people do not use refrigerators. In fact, I've testified that usually they don't even consume dead. Why? Because they're consuming, they're cannibals. They're consuming while people are alive. But yet, you know, what's the other thing that nitrate is used in? It's used in mummification as well, which I've testified in that is a practice they use as well. Doing all of those processes according to, they're going to get into the Egyptian, the esoteric, and their spirituality, and all of that being connected to their beliefs that they can raise the dead. Um, so you get a lot of things connected with that. Some of their other symbology for, like we talked about for wages, is the corn, wine. Wine's going to get into, juice, into red liquid, uh, adreno, and your oil, which is the fats, which can also represent your meats, um, which are, the difference between your regular meat, your salt pork, and your oil is that, that meat is going to be attained during ritual times. The high priest would, burn the fat before the Lord as a sign of their allegiance. So, there's so many departments, agencies, organizations that things are outsourced to. All of the symbols, once you know how to read, you understand, that these symbols represent regions, represent quadrants, where authorities and jurisdictions are given from this foreign government and their foreign military. Um, you'd have a Southern Lodge, you'd have a Northern Lodge here, you would have military installations that they're going to operate out of. This representing, the sun, the golden dawn, this representing water, their connection to Leviathan. Overall, this representing the tree of life, their base symbol of Solomonic magic. You'd have the supports or the wings in the brotherhood symbology here. And that going back to, um, let's come back to the EPA here, but I want to just show you from their initiates of the flame, they're one of their core symbols, representing the brotherhood is you have a circle. It may or may not have the great white flame here representing Lucifer, and you have the wings, the one towards the east, representing the golden dawn, the other representing the order of the phoenix. Yet when they add, like in the EPA, when you have it looking more like butterfly wings, what does that represent? That gets into the monarch program, which, the hierarchy children are those that are born into the system and are going to be chosen for some job in the system. Um, so this would represent not only brotherhood, the three main orders in the brotherhood, but the brotherhood's training program, the monarch program, which is run through the 5 departments of the system: the Masons, the Mormons, the Jesuit Catholics, the Kabbalah, and the Satanists, all of that being connected to the educational system within the United States and internationally. And their trafficking of children through the educational system to the military in connection for their training in the sovereign military order. um, so when you see this, you have to ask, what connection is there between the Environmental Protection Agency and the educational systems? Is that connecting piece going to come through, these 16 departments and the inspector generals? And will it come particularly in connection to our Department of Energy? You know, and the connection between the Department of Energy and the trafficking of children through the educational system. You know, their use of these underground military bases, these underground Nazi facilities and installations and underground submarine lines as an avenue, you know, for creating children, weaponizing children, um, you know, to teach them magic, and you know, in that creating children that are weaponized in our country. So I believe that that is where all this is going. And I'll end that for today, but there's a lot with the lower councils. I think that, you know, the state of Minnesota, you know, they've made an outright declaration there. They've raised the flag, declaring their symbols and declaring that the entire state of Minnesota is under the authority and power of a foreign government, the Luciferian Brotherhood, who, you know, aren't just going to attend 4 rituals a year. They're going to have, you know, within their ritual rotation, they're going to have areas where they're participating in all 8 satanic rituals a year, all season long. And in that declaration, you know, they're going to be engaging in homosexual sex as well as bestiality. Um, a great resource is the Open Scroll Calendar, um, /satanic holidays. On that source, you can see all the major satanic holidays each month. You can see when they begin to abduct around the 13th of every month. They will hold people in cages. Some of those cages areas I've named in my affidavits. Um, and then, you know, you'll see when the grand high climaxes are. That's going to be when they're sacrificing people every month. You can know by the churches and the face fronts where the altars are. And if, you know, in the rotation, if that area is up, you'll know right where they're sacrificing people. And then you are able to know where the rituals will be taking place. Um, you know, and in that you also can see in the open scroll calendar the ages of the children, the sex of the children that they're going to be sacrificing. You'll also see some terms like satanic revels. That's their word for orgies, which will include adults, children. When you see the term demon revels, that's their term for orgies that include demonic spirits as well as beast. So that's where your bestiality is going to happen during those times. So all of that information you're going to begin to find in my series, Unveiling the Structure of the System, which you'll find on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com. Again, I find these matters of great concern and matters of national security. I encourage people to watch the videos on my website, as well as you can find my reports of on timothycharleshomeseth.com, as well as my affidavits. So thank you, and we'll continue further at another time as we get more into the upper layers of the Council of the Luciferian Brotherhood and Sovereign Military Order. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.